Boasberg says instead of giving the information he wanted, the government gave a 6-paragraph declaration from an Immigration and Customs Enforcement office in Texas. The declaration notified the court that cabinet secretaries are considering whether to invoke state secrets privilege, which allows the government to withhold certain information because of national security concerns. To begin, the government cannot proffer a regional ICE official to attest to cabinet-level discussions of the state secrets privilege. Boasberg wants the DOJ to answer several questions, including what time the planes took off from the U.S. and how many migrants were removed via the Alien Enemies Act of 1798. President Trump is now calling on the Supreme Court to step in, saying unlawful nationwide injunctions by radical left judges could very well lead to the destruction of our country. Now, Republican Missouri Senator Josh Hawley is proposing legislation to restrict the lower court's ability to issue nationwide injunctions.
Late Friday, the Trump administration announced it was revoking the legal status of more than 500,000 immigrants from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela who came to the U.S. legally under a parole status. It comes as Friday, federal judge James Boasberg rebuked the Trump administration for ignoring his order to turn planes around mid-flight, carrying Venezuelan migrants to a high-security detention facility in El Salvador.
President Ibrahim Traoré has turned down an invitation from Donald Trump, stating he has local commitments and a nation to build. In a surprising and bold move, the refusal is seen as a strong message of prioritizing his country's development over foreign engagements. Sources say Trump felt embarrassed by the rejection, as most African leaders usually welcome invitations from a U.S. president with enthusiasm.
Could a 200-year-old wartime law reshape U.S. immigration policy? As Trump seeks the Supreme Court's help to fast-track deportations, Burkina Faso's defiant leader Ibrahim Traoré watches closely, rejecting U.S. influence. This high-stakes legal battle isn't just about borders. It's a global power play. Dive into the clash of presidential authority, immigration tensions, and rising anti-West sentiment shaping geopolitics today. Chapter 1. Trump's Supreme Court appeal on deportations. President Trump has escalated his legal battle over immigration by seeking the intervention of the U.S. Supreme Court. His administration aims to resume deporting Venezuelan migrants under the Alien Enemies Act, a wartime law last used during World War II. This appeal follows a decision by a federal court blocking these deportations, citing concerns about due process and diplomatic negotiations. The Justice Department argues that the federal courts should not interfere with executive powers tied to national security. Acting Solicitor General Sarah Harris emphasized the risks posed by delaying deportations, including potential harm to sensitive foreign relations. The administration's move reflects its broader strategy to assert presidential authority over immigration policy, even with strong opposition from civil rights groups. Chapter 2. Overview of the Alien Enemies Act and its historical context. The Alien Enemies Act, enacted in 1798 as part of the Alien and Sedition Acts, grants the president authority to detain or deport non-citizens from enemy nations during wartime. Unlike other acts in this legislative package, it remains active today under U.S. Code Title 50. Chapter 3. Historically, it has been invoked during periods of conflict, such as the War of 1812, World War I, and World War II, targeting nationals from enemy countries like Britain, Germany, and Japan. Amendments in 1918 expanded its scope beyond males, allowing broader application during wartime crises. While originally designed to address threats during declared wars, its use has sparked debates about civil liberties and executive overreach. Trump's recent invocation of this law highlights its controversial nature, as critics question whether it aligns with contemporary principles of justice and due process. Chapter 3. Trump's use of wartime powers for Venezuelan deportations. President Trump has invoked the Alien Enemies Act to justify deporting Venezuelan migrants he claims are linked to criminal networks threatening U.S. security. This marks the first use of the act since World War II. Under his proclamation, migrants identified as gang members were flown to El Salvador and Honduras for detention, a move criticized for circumventing judicial oversight. The administration argues these deportations are essential to dismantle migrant criminal networks operating domestically. However, opponents contend this approach violates constitutional protections and due process rights. Judge James E. Boasberg temporarily blocked these actions, expressing concerns about their legality and immediate consequences for affected individuals. Chapter 4. Justice Department's Emergency Appeal to the Supreme Court. Following setbacks in lower courts, the Justice Department filed an emergency appeal with the U.S. Supreme Court, seeking permission to resume deportations under Trump's proclamation invoking the Alien Enemies Act. The department argued that judicial interference hampers sensitive diplomatic negotiations and undermines national security efforts tied to immigration enforcement. Acting Solicitor General Sarah Harris stressed that delays could have debilitating effects on foreign relations, while jeopardizing public safety domestically. Wait a second, do you think invoking a 200-year-old law for modern deportations is justified, or does it overstep constitutional boundaries? Share your thoughts with us. This appeal represents a pivotal moment in Trump's broader strategy to assert executive control over immigration policy using historical legal provisions. If successful, it could redefine presidential powers concerning wartime measures applied outside traditional conflict scenarios, while intensifying debates over civil liberties and governmental authority in immigration matters today. Chapter 5. Implications for presidential authority and national security. Trump's appeal to the Supreme Court to enforce deportations under the Alien Enemies Act could redefine the boundaries of presidential authority. By invoking a wartime statute, the administration seeks to expand executive powers in areas traditionally limited by judicial oversight. Critics argue that such actions could erode the system of checks and balances, granting future presidents unprecedented control over immigration and national security decisions. Proponents, however, view this as a necessary step to address evolving threats tied to migration. This legal battle also raises questions about how far national security concerns can justify bypassing established due process protections. If upheld, the case could set a precedent for using historical laws in modern contexts, potentially reshaping executive authority in other domains like foreign policy and emergency governance. Chapter 6. Reactions from immigrant advocacy groups and legal experts. Immigrant advocacy organizations and legal experts have strongly opposed Trump's deportation plans under the Alien Enemies Act, labeling them as unconstitutional and harmful to vulnerable populations. Groups like the ACLU have pre-drafted lawsuits to challenge these measures, emphasizing violations of due process and human rights. They argue that mass deportations under this act could lead to racial profiling and undermine trust in law enforcement within immigrant communities. Legal scholars have also expressed concern about using a centuries-old law in ways it was not originally intended, warning of potential misuse in other contexts. Advocacy groups are mobilizing grassroots campaigns, protests, and Know Your Rights education programs to empower affected individuals. These efforts highlight broader fears about the erosion of civil liberties under expanded executive powers. The legal community remains divided, with some supporting stricter immigration enforcement while others prioritize constitutional safeguards. Chapter 7. Burkina Faso's President Ibrahim Traoré's anti-West stance. Ibrahim Traoré has emerged as a vocal critic of Western influence in Africa, positioning Burkina Faso as a leader in the continent's push for sovereignty. His administration has expelled French troops, ended military agreements with Western nations, and strengthened ties with Russia and China. Traoré accuses Western governments of exploiting Africa's resources, while failing to address security challenges like terrorism. His rhetoric resonates with a growing wave of anti-colonial sentiment across Africa, especially among younger populations disillusioned with traditional alliances. By advocating for regional self-reliance and rejecting Western aid conditions, Traoré has gained both domestic support and international attention. However, his policies have drawn criticism from Western leaders, who argue they risk destabilizing existing partnerships. Traoré's stance reflects broader geopolitical shifts as African nations seek alternative alliances to assert their independence on the global stage. Chapter 8. Traoré's rejection of Trump's Oval Office invitation. President Ibrahim Traoré recently declined an invitation from Donald Trump for an Oval Office meeting, signaling his resistance to aligning Burkina Faso with U.S. interests. The rejection underscores his broader strategy of distancing Burkina Faso from Western influence, while fostering ties with non-Western powers like Russia and China. Sources close to Traoré suggest that he viewed the invitation as an attempt to undermine his anti-Western policies or pressure him into concessions on trade and security matters. This diplomatic snub highlights growing tensions between African leaders advocating for sovereignty and Western nations seeking to maintain influence on the continent. Analysts see this as part of a larger trend where African leaders assert their independence by rejecting symbolic gestures from global powers that they perceive as insincere or exploitative. Chapter 9: Geopolitical Shift in U.S.-Africa Relations under Traoré. Under Ibrahim Traoré's leadership, Burkina Faso has become a focal point for shifting U.S.-Africa relations. His government's pivot toward Russia and China reflects a broader trend among African nations seeking alternatives to traditional Western partnerships. This shift challenges long-standing U.S. strategies focused on counterterrorism cooperation and economic aid tied to governance reforms. By rejecting Western military support and embracing resource-sharing agreements with non-Western allies, Burkina Faso signals its intent to chart an independent course in global politics. This realignment has implications for U.S. influence on the continent, particularly as other African nations observe Traoré's defiance. Washington faces increasing pressure to adapt its approach by offering more equitable partnerships or risk losing strategic footholds in Africa altogether. The evolving dynamics highlight how leaders like Traoré are reshaping Africa's role in global geopolitics through bold policy shifts and new alliances. I have a question for you. Should leaders like Traoré prioritize sovereignty over traditional alliances, or does this risk isolating their nations? Comment below. Chapter 10: Burkina Faso's strengthening ties with Russia and China. Burkina Faso has deepened its alliances with Russia and China, reshaping its geopolitical landscape. Russia has provided military support, including paramilitary forces and aerial resources, to bolster Burkina Faso's fight against Islamist insurgencies. Additionally, Moscow reopened its embassy after 32 years and signed agreements for nuclear energy projects. Meanwhile, China has expanded its economic footprint in the country, investing in mining operations, infrastructure, and security systems. Chinese companies are extracting gold, lithium, and uranium, aligning their interests with the ruling junta's economic priorities. Both nations have capitalized on Burkina Faso's anti-Western stance following its withdrawal from ECOWAS, offering alternatives to traditional Western partnerships. These developments highlight a growing trend of African nations seeking diverse alliances to assert sovereignty and reduce reliance on Western powers. Burkina Faso's strategic partnerships with Russia and China are reshaping regional dynamics in the Sahel. Chapter 11: Global Reactions to Traoré's Defiant Foreign Policy Moves. Ibrahim Traoré's bold foreign policy has drawn mixed reactions worldwide. Western nations have criticized his rejection of traditional alliances, particularly his expulsion of French troops and refusal to engage diplomatically with the U.S. Conversely, Russia and China have embraced his defiance, strengthening ties through military and economic cooperation. Regional blocs like ECOWAS have expressed concern over Burkina Faso's withdrawal, fearing destabilization in West Africa. African nations sympathetic to Traoré's anti-colonial rhetoric view his actions as a model for asserting sovereignty against foreign interference. Human rights organizations have raised alarms over potential authoritarian tendencies under his leadership, citing restrictions on media freedom and alleged abuses by paramilitary forces. These reactions underscore the polarizing nature of Traoré's policies, as he challenges established norms while reshaping Burkina Faso's role in global geopolitics. Chapter 12: Comparison of Trump's deportation policies and Traoré's sovereignty push. Trump's immigration policies emphasize executive authority over deportations, invoking historical laws like the Alien Enemies Act to address perceived national security threats. In contrast, Ibrahim Traoré focuses on rejecting foreign influence to assert Burkina Faso's sovereignty. While Trump uses legal frameworks to expand presidential powers domestically, Traoré employs diplomatic defiance to reshape international relations. Both leaders face criticism for undermining established norms. Trump for bypassing judicial oversight, and Traoré for rejecting multilateral cooperation with ECOWAS and Western allies. The common thread between their approaches is their reliance on unilateral actions to achieve policy goals. However, Trump's measures target individuals within U.S. borders, whereas Traoré's policies aim at broader geopolitical realignments. This comparison highlights how leadership styles differ based on domestic versus international priorities. Chapter 13: Potential long-term impact on U.S. immigration and foreign policy. Trump's appeal to the Supreme Court could set a precedent for using historical laws in modern immigration enforcement. If successful, future administrations may invoke wartime statutes to bypass judicial challenges in deportation cases tied to national security concerns. This shift could lead to stricter immigration policies and expanded executive powers at the expense of due process protections. On the foreign policy front, U.S.-Africa relations face challenges as leaders like Ibrahim Traoré reject Western influence in favor of partnerships with Russia and China. Washington may need to recalibrate its approach by offering equitable trade agreements or risk losing strategic footholds in Africa. These developments underscore how immigration enforcement intersects with global diplomacy, shaping America's role in an increasingly multipolar world. Chapter 14: Analyzing the intersection of immigration and geopolitics. Immigration policy often reflects broader geopolitical trends, as seen in Trump's use of wartime laws for deportations and Traoré's rejection of Western alliances. Trump frames immigration enforcement as a national security issue, leveraging historical legal provisions to assert executive authority domestically. Meanwhile, Traoré's foreign policy prioritizes sovereignty by aligning Burkina Faso with non-Western powers like Russia and China. Both leaders challenge established norms, Trump within judicial frameworks and Traoré through diplomatic defiance, highlighting how domestic policies can influence global relations. The intersection of these issues reveals a complex dynamic where immigration enforcement becomes a tool for asserting national interests amid shifting geopolitical alliances. Understanding these connections is crucial for analyzing how leadership decisions impact both internal governance and international positioning in an interconnected world. Hold on a second. How do you see the balance between national security and due process in immigration policies? Share your thoughts with us. From the halls of the U.S. Supreme Court to the shifting alliances in Africa, this story highlights the intersection of immigration, sovereignty, and global power. As Trump fights for wartime deportations and Traoré charts a defiant path, the world watches. Stay tuned for more updates on this evolving geopolitical drama. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for in-depth analysis.